We are recording.
All right. My name is Noah Holm. I work as an academic technologist at the University of Minnesota. Our participant list has doubled in size to around 40. I think it's still small enough that we can kind of unmute and speak up if you have a comment or you'd like to dispute what I've just said. I see my role today as more of a facilitator, and I welcome people bring up their challenges as we discuss, what's working and what needs a solution for that classroom camera. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes saying a few provocative things, and then I'm definitely going to rely on my colleagues here at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. Katie McDonald is with us, and Chuck Bottomiller. They both work for Classroom Technical Services. That's our in-house integrator, and they will be able to speak more soundly towards the technical sides of things, whereas I represent the instructor perspective in our project and those outcomes. So I put up a few tabs here that I'm sharing. That's Hal. And I like this shot because it actually looks a lot like one of the cameras we installed a lot of in classrooms over the last year, a device made by Polycom. At first we were like, oh, is this intrusive? Are people going to be weirded out by this? And I don't think it has become that. That concern has not been there, but I think it is weird that almost every single classroom now has a camera in it in the general purpose pool, the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. It's a different thing. And I am excited to see what happens when they get used at a much higher rate this coming fall. So that's the context I'm coming into it, is we have a general purpose classroom pool of about 300 classrooms. On Monday, I was at a webinar. It was held by this group. I'm going to call out Justin Rexing for saying something to the extent of, it's really simple to put a bunch of classroom cameras in. It's what happened next that is really critical, right? He said something more sophisticated than that, but in a sense, that's what he said. And I think it was a good call out because that's sometimes what we're asked to do. And a lot of us have done that, I think, in the last year or two or five. So we got a jump start on it. And some of those classroom cameras aren't looking as great now. In fact, I'll jump to that right now. This is a webpage that we launched last week. We're trying to help people make that decision. So is it the new Polycom we put in? Is it the PTZ, these pan tilt zoom cameras that can get the exact angle right? Or will these fixed angle cameras we put in 4 or 5 years ago still hold their own? Or do we need to go all the way up to something with auto tracking? And is it for the student or is it for the instructor? And we've kind of jumped that direction. And the last thing I'll say as we kind of get into things is on Tuesday, maybe you saw this, Apple released a new iPad Pro. It's just shipping like next week. And you may have noticed that it's like 6th or 7th feature that they put out there, but it's got an ultra wide camera with something called center stage, which is an auto focusing feature built into the hardware of the camera. And it's a little wider angle. I have only seen the 30 seconds they had in their promo, but this is a watershed moment, I think, is that a device is shipping with an internal webcam, and they made the leap from a kind of a poor 720p image to a 1080 wide angle auto adjusting image to capture one or many faces in the shot. So it's kind of a great time to be looking at cameras and what can we do with them. I'm going to stop my screen share now and pause. The chat should be just our room now. If you want to put in a question there, because that's like the best way that you can say, here's something I really need an answer to. That's a great way to get started. In lieu of that, I might call on Katie or Chuck to jump off of what I just said and see if there's anything I missed about how our campus is tackling the issue of cameras, or maybe provide a tease about what they think is next. We can go any of that place. And for those of you just joining us, this is totally cool to unmute and contribute to the conversation. And I love chat. If you want to chat, I will read your chats and we can go that way too. So.
Hey, Noah, I'll start the conversation. I'm Kara Hansen. I'm from UMD. We know you know it. So we took kind of a different approach and decided not to put cameras in most of our classrooms. We have some in our large lecture. And so, I kind of get the short term. I mean, like I said, we went back and forth on this, especially when we know we might have that mix, that high flex or whatever, however you want to describe it, right? But whether it's a hybrid of some remote students and some face-to-face students. Long term, how do you see cameras fitting into that? I mean, if we move back, I mean, do you anticipate that this is going to be a trend that sticks around? Or do you see the cameras having a different, more like a lecture capture kind of situation longer term? I'm just curious if you've thought about that, because it's some of the things that we kind of tried to think about as we were making those decisions.
Yeah, I do think right now we're ahead of demand. I don't think a camera is needed in every class for every room. But Katie, what do you think?
I think that it is going to be a trend that continues. We've gotten a lot of requests for more elaborate systems, a lot more, as you mentioned, the high flex scenario where there's multiple, there's people at home and there's people in the room, and how do those folks interact with each other? And we have a couple of departments who are currently willing to spend a lot of money to try it out. And only a couple, but a lot of them want it to happen, but don't want to spend any money on it, as I'm sure you've experienced. So there's the use of cameras is definitely something the faculty are interested in. The practicalities of it is the sticking point. As Noah was saying earlier, that how the instructor interacts with the classroom can't take away from how the instructor interacts with the students. And that's our biggest hurdle right now, I think.
Thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah, I think we're hitting a ceiling of I would say cognitive load. Maybe you've seen this at your institution where you give somebody a great submenu on the touchscreen to go up, down, left, right, and they may not do anything else other than get the signal to the device, right? They just want the anecdotal video for what's going on. Asking an instructor who doesn't have a TA support or a staffer on site to help produce the content, those controls may go unused. Does anybody have a good solution for addressing that cognitive load?
Well, I was just going to add one more thing. So we've had, distance learning classrooms on campus for 30 years. So there's a small select group of faculty that have learned how to teach in this sort of an environment. What we're talking about now is really bringing this to the mass of the faculty, where they were used to just walking in and doing it. And now there's a skill set that there are some people who have it. And how do we get that skill set into the rest of the faculty and get them? And honestly, I think the last year has been the big training. Everybody has had to do it. Everybody has learned to do it. You now have everybody in that mode. And so the question is, what can we put into classrooms that they will use and take forward that will actually enhance it? And what will they need that, there's things we could put in that would never get used. And so how do we differentiate those? Because some of the features are very expensive. One of the features they want to track or try out is tracking cameras for the student speakers in the classroom. And while that's a very expensive thing to do, especially if you don't have a wired push to talk, if you want to do it, by some sort of an acoustic means and an AI to try and look at people talking, it's a very challenging thing to do. Now that stuff keeps improving a lot. And in 5 years, if demand is there, or 10 years, it'll be nothing. You just put the camera in and it'll just do it.
Yeah.
Kind of like what's happened with the little Poly Studios and everything. Between the AI, the software that's in it, it's full field camera. It tracks it. It can hear who's speaking, and it can see the lips moving, and it knows where to frame. And that kind of technology will come into a more generic, or not generic, but into a classroom type, conferencing camera.
Let's pause there. Any questions for Chuck on that specific solution? Because I wanted to bring in some non-University of Minnesota voices. Because chat is power. I see a hand raised from Texas A&M. Daryl, do you want to say something? I'm not getting your audio. As you double check that, I want to call on John Knowles. So you're saying getting the audio right is the challenge in the high flex situation. Because we're in the classroom camera room, I'm going to call you. Are you looking to also align video with where the audio is coming from? So for us, it's a big jump to go from an instructor camera to an instructor camera plus a student cam, because it's either switching the manually or having some automation programmed in. What's happening at Augsburg?
Yeah, we traditionally have just done single camera stuff, very few codecs in the old days, but also some Logitech meetup style things, that kind of business. And before pandemic, we had people using them that did okay, but they were driven in the early days by people who basically wanted, for different reasons, wanted the camera to just shoot the class, so shoot the student part of it and not capture the instructor. And then other folks came along and said, well, we want the opposite, and so can't you do that? And then so we like, well, we either make the camera movable, or which is problematic, or you have to do two camera, and you're in a different world of complexity and expense at that point. And so I think when I took that back to the departments and my boss and whatever, there was a bit of a like, whoa, this is a lot more expensive, and we're not going to be able to put it in all these rooms. So, and it's a lot better now for that. The easy IP and things similar to that have really helped, relatively, but even that is a lot more expensive. And my comment on the audio was really more of once you have the camera and the coverage of the room going beyond just the traditional capture, lecture, instructor model, it really gets difficult to pick up the entire conversation of the room, the sound. And again, there are good microphone options for this. The Shure products in that category are great. But again, the complexity, the expense and everything just really, really goes up to just capture everything. And then I want to just piggyback on the other comment really quickly on that load on the instructors, which is something on the academic side, Augsburg has been very cautious about. And actually has discouraged high flex for most instructors. We had a few people doing it last fall with limited results, even with good equipment. Again, having that support, that production element for people who are not used to it is really difficult, and a lot of instructors have a hard time with it, and and it ends up being kind of a subpar experience for either the remote people or the people in the classroom. So that's kind of been, so basically we've still gone to either you're in person or you're remote for the time being. Having said that, we all know that even before the pandemic, all of this style equipment has been very, very much in demand. It will continue to be just for video conferencing alone. And so that's another reason we still have to get better at it.
Okay, can I make a comment about the camera tracking? We've used I'm Texas A&M University. We've used camera tracking in the past. I've been doing AV since 2000. And what we found with the tracking, especially when it tracks professors, is that they move. When we have professors that move, it goes like this. And it really is extremely distracting. What we've done is we have several different views where we can view the students, we can view the professor, we can do a wide view, we can do a close-up view, and that becomes the professor's choice. We also try to train each professor when they come in, not that it helps, but we try to train each professor as they come in the basics for using the equipment. So we now have cameras in so many rooms, it's amazing. But I've done distance education, like I said, since 2000, and the issues with the tracking has always been for 20 years, the back and forth and the drag it has when it's moving. So I'm not a component to the follow me as I speak team. I'm a component of move the camera or have a wide angle if you're going to move around and talk.
Just want to say thanks to Rodney, who's helped me keep track of chat there. Thanks, Daryl, for chiming in there. I wanted to go back to some of the earlier chats that were said. Jay, thanks for your comment right away. The students I talked to would like the hybrid model to continue. And this can be an enrollment driver if you're able to do it in a high quality way. I think that maybe gets to your comment, Kara, of like, how do we right size the right amount of tech in the right places? I think students are going to give us a lot of feedback in the coming year about how the last year went, how this coming year goes. And that's going to help, I think, shape things at scale for us. And as we kind of like hone in on the right size solution. I mean, the distance classrooms that we have at the U at the Twin Cities, Chuck, it's like single digits, right? Or it was for like 10, 15 years. We subtly kind of added some more cameras in, then it kind of exploded over the last year. I think we're going to know how well we did in about 6 to 9 months, I hope. Rodney, anything else you want to call out about chat? I'm going to pause and look at that. There was some questions about like the importance of 2 cameras.
I was just going to add to comment on Daryl's comment. So yeah, tracking actual moving cameras are really bad for codecs because then your whole background moves and the amount of data refresh it takes is huge. So what we try and do is cuts. So, you know, it's easy. It hears a student, it cuts to that camera. And then when it hears somebody else, somewhere else, the other camera cuts to that person. So it's a cut back and forth and the whole frame changes. So it's not a panning, because panning is what makes codecs go nuts.
Yeah.
I also want to just, and you guys have maybe found this out, but we did some experiments with cameras and camera quality, and other than light sensitivity, which is an important factor when it comes to actual resolution, we took 3 different cameras, ran them all into Zoom of 3 different qualities in terms of resolution and everything else, and they all came out on the other side looking just about the same, because Zoom would down res them and make them fit into whatever window they were willing to of resolution and compression that they were going to send. And so while if we did a raw recording, they looked incredibly different than the high res ones. It looked way better. When once we ran them through Zoom, it didn't make as big a difference as we expected. So that was just another, since this is sort of a camera form, I just wanted to bring up. The other thing is that it changes. So you can't say, oh, just buy the lowest camera, because as soon as you're watching it, if you're in Zoom and one of your participants goes full screen on a video feed, then it'll tell the camera of the sender to go full res, and it'll try and transmit a higher resolution image. But like right now, it's down resing everybody, and it's actually telling everybody's camera to send a smaller rate from your actual computer in. But if we highlight one person and bring it up, their resolution will go up. You see a lot of information on this. If you go down and you monitor the stats of the incoming and outgoing videos, you can really see the actual resolutions and the amount of data, and as it changes based on how you manipulate your windows. It's a very interesting thing to see. Okay, I've talked too much.
There was a question for you, Daryl, over at Texas A&M. Do you have on-site staff helping with these classrooms with multiple cameras? I think I see a nod.
Yes, we have on-site staff. We usually utilize student workers. When there's a problem, they run, they fix it. If they can't fix it, then we just promote it to a higher tier, and that person goes in and tries to fix it. And that's the only solution I've ever seen that actually works to give faculty and staff the confidence that we're there to make sure that this is successful. Because with distance learning, that's the only thing that you can do is make sure it's successful, because you have people who have different opinions about distance learning. They feel, oh, well, I'm not going to get the same. If I do it online, I'm not going to get this, I'm not going to get that. But the truth is, it's not true. The research shows that you get just as much out of distance learning, if not more, because you have the time to ask questions. You have the time to really think about what they're saying and interact with other students and faculty at that point. So I've always been a component of distance education, especially for people who are in poverty, because it's the only way that they're going to learn or have the opportunity to learn. So
There's a good side conversation going on in chat about how to get an answer for what to do with lab spaces. And you've got very specific, I'm guessing, tight shots that you need of an experiment or something going on. If you have any great advice, head over to chat and throw that in there. Or if you want to unmute and bring it up, that's great.
Actually, Tim will have in the lightning rounds, Tim is going to be talking about a portable camera system that we built. I actually saw it in action, something similar to it at the UNLV a few years ago. So stay tuned for that. I don't want to give his, I don't want to let too much out of the bag, but something that might be useful for your labs.
yeah, A&M, we have a Godiva lab, for lack of a better term. And we, for a long time, had Kodak and cameras in there to show, and they've just recently stopped that. Because it is difficult to try to show what you're working on, what you're looking at to a group of people online, so.
Daryl, do you guys have faculty operate switching between cameras?
Yes, we do, yes, because
How
I
does that
can't,
go?
we can't have a technician in there all the time. So we do train faculty. And if there's a problem, then of course we'll go in and fix it. But we try to train all the faculty just on the basics. Like, okay, if someone can't hear you, check to see if your mic is on. I mean, because by the time they call us when we get there, they've lost 6 minutes. And by them checking to see if it's muted or the volume's up, they save those 6 minutes. Not
Well,
that
yeah.
they always do, they do call us though.
That's a concern for us as we try to develop something like others have talked about with 2-camera
Right,
integration. There's a lot of easy options. If it's a small meeting of 5 to 8 people, there's meeting owls, there's Jabbercast, there's all these kinds of things. But what seems to be cool about those that don't seem to have many options out there for ease of faculty use is, can I see the room that I'm supposed to be in while also seeing the detailed facial expressions and gestures of the faculty member? And even we've been talking about for the student, if you throw 2 camera feeds, let's say use the other camera of like a document source, as a consumer on the other end, I want to be thinking about the content and taking notes and having discussion with my classmates. I don't want to be sitting there deciding, do I want to see that shot or that shot? What's cool about some of those smaller tools that haven't scaled to lecture size yet is my eyes are the switcher. You know, I can, like in this environment, I can look around at everybody and I don't need to push any buttons with the tools to get there. So is anybody doing 2 cameras without even the faculty member touching anything?
We are looking at doing something like that in our potential iFlex enabled rooms. However, we have found that if all of the auto tracking is enabled on multiple cameras, then a student drops something and they hijack the feed. You know, that all you got to do is cough and suddenly you're the focus of the class. And so we're trying to figure out a way so that the instructor can at least say, yes, do auto tracking follow to everybody, or no, just follow me. So that they have some sort of control over the general direction of the class, but yet having it be fully automatic is not something we've been able to achieve, for sure.
So I have a question here to the group. I mean, audio is always the most important component of any kind of a video interaction. And students and faculty don't like to be on camera. They don't like to have that close-up shot as a general rule. We have been using PTZ cameras and putting the control on the touch panel, but Has anybody been experimenting with just a static wide shot of the room, just so you can see what's going on in the room, but it's not really interactive. You're just getting a view of the room. Nobody's really close up, so nobody's uncomfortable because the camera's zooming in on them. Or
I'm seeing a couple raised hands. Let's go to
Yeah.
John from Trinity, and then Jason, you're up next.
Hi, I'm from Trinity College. I want to thank you guys. This is a great group. I'm actually not in the Midwest. I'm in Hartford, Connecticut, but this is a great event. So in most of our classrooms, and we're a small private liberal arts college, and we've outfitted about 60 classrooms last summer. And one of the real challenges we came upon, which I'm sure you all know, is trying to find equipment last summer was an absolute nightmare. So what we have a few rooms that we put together. Prior to COVID, we did no hybrid teaching whatsoever. In fact, online classes were not accepted for transfer credits. Our whole brand was about in-person small classes. Obviously that changed last March. We did a few rooms with PTZ cameras where we gave control to faculty to move the camera around. Nobody wanted to touch the controls. We did a couple rooms with auto tracking, and people said, I'm getting motion sick because everything's moving back and forth. So that was a problem. What we had the most success with was 2 Logitech USB cameras, a 910 or a Brio, whatever we could get. One of them on a tripod with a USB extender to our workstation, our installed computer area. And then the other one, which we mounted up above and got just that static wide shot. And then we ran both those cameras into, it's an Intergenie Share to You, which is a USB switcher. And we put the app for switching those cameras, either picture in picture, side by side, or one camera or the other. We put that on the installed computer in the room. And while some people still had challenges, that was our most successful approach. I'm not going to say the Intergenie is the best piece out there. We had some real issues with firmware updates, but we've kind of gotten through those and gotten around those. And so that's what we've got in most of our classrooms, and it's been pretty good. Audio is another story, especially if you guys have old buildings. That's a challenge, but that's what we did.
So I got a quick question about that.
Manufacturer's name.
Yeah, can you put the link to chat? Is that what you're looking for, David?
Okay. I wanted
Yeah, I'll put a link to it.
All that.
Okay, cool. Because I was curious about that as well. My other question is, so are you basically the instructor experience when they have to turn their camera on in their web conferencing platform? I don't know if you're using Zoom or what you're using, but so basically they just say, I want that signal in. It's just one signal. They're not seeing 2 USB cameras. Is that correct?
So we're using Zoom.
Okay.
95% of faculty, a few are using Teams, but we're using Zoom, and we are just setting up the instructor workstation computer. We have computers in every classroom, and we're setting that up so that the only input that it's getting for video into Zoom is that Intergenie device. And they do need to open up the app for Intergenie, but then it just has a graphic, a nice basic graphic where camera 1, camera 2, side by side, etc. And awesome. They click on that. I'm not going to say nobody has issues, because we came from nothing like this at all, but it's been pretty solid.
And what's your install base? How many rooms?
We're just 60, but I got to say, it's just me and half of another guy. So
right.
I feel I agree with 300 classrooms, and I'm impressed. But
all right, well, hopefully it's as good half. Jason.
Hi, Jason Unseth, EW Eau Claire. I want to ask this excellent brain trust that we have here today. I have a lot of cameras that are not DE, or I mean, we have a lot of DE classes, but we also have a lot of instructional spaces like nursing simulation suites, observation, or things that are used in a clinical setting. And because of that, these cameras have to be powered, usually almost always now, with power over Ethernet. However, I have had more than my share of headaches in the last year with either power over Ethernet requirements being just plain wrong, or cameras dying because either they're being underpowered or overpowered? And I saw that John had a Ohm's law behind him, which is excellent for this question. But I'm just curious how people are generally powering their cameras, because in a clinical setting, you can't necessarily, you want to be as a lot of these cameras, you want to be discreet, and you don't want, power supplies hanging off them or what have you. So usually the power is coming from an IDF, or a network switch in an IDF, right? And so we stopped putting injectors in because they're clunky, they're bulky. You don't want to fill up a whole IDF full of injectors, especially if you have 60 cameras in the building. So unfortunately, like in one of these installations in particular, I'm getting the Access P5414E in particular, that's the model, dying like nuts. So it's a PoE circuit in particular. If you put a 24-volt exterior supply on it, works great, but that PoE circuit gets fried out over time. And according to my networking team and the electricians here, it's not an overvoltage. It's not something that's happening as a result of a building power surge. So it design flaw, I don't know. So I've tried to come up with different solutions, but I'm just curious how people are if you're experiencing this issue, and if you are, how you're dealing with it.
So the thing about
Chuck,
this,
before you get into it real quick, if you would like to respond to this, like Chuck is eager to, raise your hand and I'll line them up. But yes, I want to hear from Chuck, especially because I think we have a variety of solutions in place.
yeah, so what happens is the amount of energy that your switch can supply is so much, and you have to do real load calculations on it. You can plug in a whole bunch of devices that don't draw much, but if you're going to put in a few that draw a lot, it's really easy to exceed that. The switches tend to regulate the port power, but when the overall power for all the ports is exceeded, they usually don't track that quite as well. And so you basically start to brown it out. You basically stress it. So what we found is that when you're doing lots of PoE, we either, we basically put in more switches and we really underrate the load. So if the switch can deliver, 200 watts, we're only going to load it to 100. We're not going to load it up to what they say. We're going to always derate it by at least 50%. Otherwise, we had power injectors for PoE devices in one of our large active learning classrooms, and they would run for 9 months, and then they would die, and we just kept replacing them, and we ended up having to come up with a different strategy to get the power correct. The other thing is when you're putting in something that draws power over the connections, you have to make sure that you're using really the heavier 6A or a thicker gauged data cable, and that the connectors are rated for the power for PoE, because some of the connectors aren't really rated for that, and so you have to make sure you have a good connector on it. We've been using Belden connectors, and they work, really, they're designed for PoE stuff. So hope that helps.
One thing I have noticed is I've been told that, I asked the network guys to look at the actual power consumption in real time. When you power up a PTZ camera for the first time, the load spikes out at around 57 watts or something. And it's dangerously close to that 60 watt threshold that's on like UPoE or whatever the PoE plus standard is. It spikes up to about 57 watts, and then it ramps down to about continuous power load is 15 or 16 watts. So so I mean, that's those PTZs in particular, that they suck load at the very beginning, and then they ramp down to get. I'm curious, like, if you have a switch that does a reset, for example, like say they do an update on a switch, it boots, it brings all those ports up, and all of a sudden all your PTZ cameras are spiking at the same time. I wonder if that's causing an issue too,
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. They're all zeroing out. So all of them are moving at the same time. So they're all doing what draws the most power when they first are powered up. There are some pan and tilts that don't use stepper motors, that use a different technology, that don't draw that big spiky power. But, you know, it kind of depends on what you have and what you're going to use. I don't think I would choose a camera based on that, but it's really like, you know, it's a power management issue for the switches. And you can, like I say, you can put in multiple switches and then, you know, derate them, and you don't have we've had much better reliability than trying to actually use what they say you can use. So
The only other thing I'll add, we can move on, is I've had one camera manufacturer, and I won't say who it is because they're, I just won't say it. But anyway, we've had one camera manufacturer that they actually figured out that when their cameras are underpowered by the switch, so they require PoE++, and if you have a PoE+ switch and it's underpowered when they're trying to cycle up, it can actually corrupt the SD card and kill the ability to network and basically kill the NIC as well.
I see you, Todd.
Well, and something else that is of interest, I think that might be in the structural way that this is put together. You mentioned something about 60 cameras in a building. Does that mean that you have all of your rooms in one building tied back to the same source?
No, they're going to multiple IDFs, you know, but
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Just
I mean,
'cause,
so
yeah,
we're
we
not
tend
putting
to-
60 cameras on one switch. That would be suicide. But
we do
So
tend to
it's-
put all of our rooms on their own isolated systems so that we're dealing with only the things in one room for a given system. But yeah, if you're doing that too, then that doesn't help.
yeah.
I'm
But
not sure.
Todd was waving frantically.
Well, he said he was going to name who it was, but it's pretty obvious to me anyway, because I've been talking to him about it. If a camera requires, that's okay. I'm fine with it there, Jace. If a camera requires PoE++, which is not really a ratified standard, I don't believe in my experience if there is such a thing as a network switch that has PoE++. So when we have a camera, certain cameras is like the UHD cameras with the bigger motors and stuff that require ++, we ship it with, of course, the ++ injector, which it's really meant to be used with. Why it corrupted the SD card on lower power, I'm not sure. I'm still working that out, but certainly using a ++ camera with a PoE+ switch it isn't gonna really do it for you. And I understand it's a little bit more sloppy, I guess, using an injector than is plugging it into a switch. But with certain power requirements, it's just the way of the world right now. But
Yeah, thank you, Todd. And what I was going to mention is it's a mystery to the manufacturer why it's corrupting the SD card. So it's
well, we're trying to figure out why that would be, but honestly, I haven't seen it in other cases other than working with you. That doesn't mean it's not happening. Just means I have a smaller territory than the whole in the United States. So, but yeah, I mean, you know, being transparent is perfectly fine with me, brother. So whatever you want to bring up to talk about, it's fine.
Sure.
Thanks, Todd. We are getting into the last 15 minutes of our breakout session. This has been really good. If you're one of those silent 24 people or so, just kind of hanging out, now is your time to ask your question if you want to put it out to the audience. Sarah, you said there's electrical gremlins and they are real, but most recently you want to just unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, I was just saying, I wonder if there's I haven't done Cisco programming for a little while, but I was wondering if there's network ports that have a setting for delaying the startup so many seconds or something, so they can end up, I said steering, I meant starting in a sequence instead of all at once. Just as an idea, so that if you do have multiple cameras on a switch, then you could maybe avoid having them all run at max power all at once.
That's a great question. I will definitely ask my network guys. That's
yeah, you can on a managed switch, you can selectively bring the ports up and down, the PoE, but it's a whole nother device that you're going to have to control. So it's just it's that merging of AV and IT, and
Yes.
as long as you have a programmer that wants to take the time, and then remember it's by port. So you can't go in, usually you can just
Right.
move things around and it doesn't matter. But in this case, you would have to make sure that you have that camera on that port so that it can sort of sequence them. So it's doable.
Any other questions on this topic of like signal routing or PoE? I know that we have made those managed components more, I guess they've become more of a normal part of conversation now as we look at routing signals in our rooms. And so we're just kind of taking that on in a significant number of rooms. Jerry, did you have your hand raised? I think I saw that in the thumbnail. And then Joe, we'll go to you next.
Real quick here, Noah, before we go, Tom, I just put up a note here, a 10-minute warning for the session to end, not 15. So I think we're going to introduce a little bit of a break here between sessions. So
sounds good. All right, Jerry.
That's it.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious to see what people are using in terms of camera control. What we actually implemented, because we're at Alverno, we're a smaller college too. We've got about 66 classrooms, and mainly what we did when the pandemic first hit is we went with what I call camera on a stick, which was basically the Logitech cameras that we could get on a microphone stand to give us a little less of a footprint than a tripod on a USB extender cable, so the faculty could move those around. In some of our larger classrooms, what we then did is augmented those with wall-mounted PTZ cameras that the faculty could switch back and forth between using Zoom as the switcher, essentially. And for our camera control, what we did is Elgato actually makes kind of this gaming button switch thing that you can program to kill zombies and do all kinds of stuff. But apparently they can actually control cameras too. So on a couple of the installs, yeah, Stream Deck, thank you. We did leave the kill zombie button on a couple of the units to see if any faculty are paying attention. But I'm curious to see if anybody else found, because that was a relatively inexpensive solution for us. We don't have any Crestron programmers here on site, and going that whole route is, obviously the expenses get, big fast. So I'd like to hear what everybody else is using.
I think in chat, the topic of Zoom Room came up, and that has kind of hit our campus a little bit when there's a lot of video signals that need to be put out to the eyeballs in the room. I think it also can help manage multiple camera signals coming in. And I'm looking at Katie and Chuck, and you can put more information out there if you want. But I think we're kind of backing into this need for, once we have all these signals and sources and then outputs, how do we make it line up as much as we can with the priorities of that class, right? So I think that's the high-end, complex, a little bit of unknowns there solution, and that's in play, but we haven't really put it through many tests yet, and that's coming. An aspect of one of those rooms, Katie, is a button that tells the system, this is the camera I want to be my presentation source. Do we know what like the product is that? But I think that's sort of what this zombie kill switch is, right?
Yeah, it's just a dry contact. It's literally just a toggle switch that you can buy at Home Depot. That is, the system is programmed to recognize as, take this as the source, and then if you hit it again, it'll take it off. And we're using that for whiteboard cameras, so that the instructor can turn to the whiteboard and hit a button, and then that whiteboard will show up as their source, rather than having to make the switch before they turn around. And that seems to be like it will work, but we don't have it in a lot of locations yet. We haven't really got it set in very many places.
Yeah, and if I may just jump in, and triggering presets or camera changes and things like that from a dry contact closure is a great way to get rid of camera movement that makes you seasick. And those dry contact closures can also be done with infrared detectors that can be mounted in the ceiling and aimed. It can be step matched, that if you step on the mat that's in front of the whiteboard, it can do that as well to take away the task of having to push the button and push it again when you're done. So
we just wanted to make sure that it was intentional and it didn't happen accidentally when somebody, stepped back too far and hit the mat or whatever. And also our custodians tend to destroy those things because, they're there. But yeah, and the Zoom room thing has also been a big deal for the multiple outputs of having multiple things visible at the same time. And our biggest challenge with Zoom rooms is going to be, you know, we have a contract with Zoom right now, but will we in 5 years? I don't know. So if we're using a Zoom-based solution, is that still going to be viable after our next life cycle goes through? So it's an open question.
I want to make sure I get time for Joe. He's been very patient. I'm hearing echoes from that over at St. Thomas with Patrick and Augsburg with John. There is a lot of unknowns with management of Zoom rooms and how they would fit in with the use of the rooms and et cetera, et cetera. So more to come there. Anyone else want to chime in real quickly to address Jerry's question of how do you go from just giving instructors a bunch of USB cameras and letting them figure it out in Zoom versus more control? I think that's kind of where that's what we're doing in majority of our classrooms is here's a USB hub output. It's going to give you your audio signal. It's going to give you a camera, usually in most of our rooms. And we're pretty sure you know how to Zoom by now. So, all right, Joe, I've seen you put a couple of chats in. I think you were addressing solutions to a previous conversation. Is that right? Or is this a new topic?
Couple of things. Well, so I jumped in on that conversation just because I happen to have a lot of experience in that kind of live stream and control platform. So we were talking about the Stream Deck, so throwing the name and the link in there, but also a company called Loop just released their Loop Deck Live, which is basically the Stream Deck, but it adds a couple of tactile knobs and things that give a little bit more control. They're really cool. I've used both of the solutions, and they're really neat and super affordable. And they're becoming more commonplace. My question is really, you know, we've been working with camera manufacturers to improve camera tracking by providing audio positional data. So I guess my question really to the group becomes, it sounds to me like you're saying that camera tracking would be something that you would like to see more of were it improved upon, where, you know, if it worked appropriately, where they're not the sudden judders of going back and forth and those types of things. I mean, if it were a smooth thing that were, you know, happening a little more naturally, driving the conversation, like a more produced, you know, kind of level broadcast or something, it sounds like that's something, you know, the users are looking for. Am I reading that right? Or does it sound, or are you also saying that nobody wants to be on camera anyway, so we just go with a wide shot? Like, where does everybody fall in this?
It's a spectrum is the problem.
Right.
We have every possible position on that spectrum existing in our campus. And so we've long ago given up on the one size fits all solution. And one of the benefits of having 300 classrooms is that we can have a range of solutions and still be within sort of a standard set of things that we do. So I think the answer is yes, it is something that folks are looking for, but it's not something that everybody is looking for. And that it'll never be the only thing that we do. There'll always be a range.
So in a situation where, certainly for those that have the control systems, I know we got to jump here, so I'll make this very quick. Would you leave it up to the instructors based on their content that day, if they could kick it on with their control system and have the ability to say, I want to have this happen, or we're just going to be a wide shot?
Ideally, yes, it would be something the instructor could choose how they wanted to use the room. Systems aren't there yet, so we have to sort of provide different rooms to do that instead and get instructors to tell us what they actually want beforehand,
Sure.
which is not always easy.
Yeah, we're at a throwing stuff at the wall and see what sticks moment.
Yeah, really.
So I'm glad we have this.
Make a quick
I
comment.
think we're coming to the end here, Noah. We're probably.
Yeah, we got
wrap
time
this
for
up,
one
so-
more.
Yep.
One more comment. I heard somebody unmute, and then I think we are gonna
Yeah,
maybe get pulled back. Apologies ahead of time if you get cut off in the middle of your comment.
okay. Yeah, instructors, they don't want to have to learn any of this stuff. They really don't. I have found that instructors, they're like, it's not their job to learn this stuff. They're here to teach. And my response to them is, if you're a doctor and someone gives you a new type of scalpel, are you going to ask the nurse to make the cut, or are you going to learn how to use that scalpel? You know,
Go
it's
ahead.
as simple as that. Your job is to teach.
Yeah.
These are the tools you use to teach. Learn them.
Yeah, I
get
feel
a
like
lot of pushback
we
from that.
definitely need to have this conversation again this time next year to
Yeah.
see if this has really become part of the landscape of learning to teach. I think you're right in a lot of ways. I just don't know how broadly that's going to be accepted and adopted. So
It's not.
yeah, right. All right. Rodney, thank you for recording. I think it's on you to make sure that you keep or close that now and make sure it
Yep,
goes to where it needs to go.
Thank you,
Thanks everybody for
everybody.
a great conversation. I really appreciate the open tone and being respectful, and Todd for keep staying with us. And yeah, I'll see you guys in another room today, I'm sure.
Okay.
See ya.